Well, welcome to the Come Up with Katia. I'm Katia Dragotis, and today's show, we're going to peel back some of the layers of the sports industry, specifically on the content and reporting side. We have Jimmy Spencer, who's the General Manager of Uninterrupted. Jimmy made his rounds as an NBA writer before eventually becoming one of the first hires of the content and really the sports powerhouse that is Uninterrupted. Jimmy, welcome to the Come Up.
Appreciate it. Those are nice things to say.
Of course, of course. Well, most people I've met in the sports industry, have that specific why they wanted to be in this business. What was that moment or series of moments growing up that made you want to be in this crazy sports industry?
Yeah, for me, I'm probably like most humans, right? I bounced around in what I wanted to do for a long time. My first, if I look back now, I think, and I could tell, you could tell the story one of two ways. I could say, I always knew I wanted to be a sports writer. I always knew I wanted to be in sports, telling stories. And I can remember I grew up in the Bay Area. And so I can remember creating my own little newspapers on like I don't know what version of computer it was back then, but it wasn't what we have now. And so I would create these little newspapers. And I remember doing like a story about Ricky Henderson that I did. So I did make a newspaper when I was like in fourth grade.
That's awesome.
Consistently for my household, I guess. So I should have known then that I was going to get in that space. But then, in high school, I was a terrible student. I was barely showing up, let alone doing well in school. So I remember struggling. I failed English when I was a sophomore in high school, and I had to go to summer school. And then I ditched summer school, and I got busted by mom. And I think at that point, I didn't think I had a career as a writer. I was
Right.
failing English as a sophomore, and I was looking around. And I thought, Mr. Butori, my English teacher, wouldn't be impressed, thinking that this is the career I want to have. And so I sadly, I didn't really have much in terms of encouragement or people leading me or mentoring me in terms of the career space. And I didn't have, my parents didn't go to college. There wasn't a strong push around college in my family, and so I say all that to say, I don't think I knew that I wanted to write about sports until I was drinking some bad beer at a keg party at the campus of Sacramento State. And I had been arguing about the lack of sports at our school and like the spirit. And I was a frustrated college freshman. And I had someone say, "Oh, I actually happen to be the sports editor at the campus newspaper. Would you want to write about that?" And so I wrote about it. And there was like this fun reaction to what I wrote. And I got hooked on that feeling. I think like anybody, the ego played in. I was like, "Oh, I have a voice here. Like this is something new." And I realized too that writing an essay in Mr. Butori's English class was far different than writing a sports article or a column at the time. And I had way more fun doing the sports column than I did anything else. And that kind of got me into it at a somewhat early age.
How did you start to sit down and write that article from the person that had failed English? That seems like a daunting task to me, to just be like, "Hey, go write what you feel." Is that the prompt that he gave you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And looking back, I can remember the room I was sitting in when I was writing it, but I can't remember. And I can remember struggling through it a little bit, but it kind of felt like I took a position of argument. And I think we all have Facebook now, or we used to. And so people are used to writing arguments online. But at the time, I really did. I think I felt so strongly. I knew what I wanted to write. I just had to figure out how to craft my voice and all those pieces. And I mean, I should probably go and try and find that article. It's probably
Yeah.
awful. It was probably awful. And that's fine. But yeah, it was definitely a new experience. And grammar, I mean, having to figure out grammar and learn. But that's also where I learned to kind of start teaching myself. Like I would model off great writers who I loved, and I would follow kind of how they wrote. And that's where I kind of was able to find my own voice.
Did you read sports writing growing up in the newspaper?
Yeah, I mean, I read box scores and standings more than anything. Like every morning, I had the newspaper out and I had the box score page, which later in my career I ended up doing at when I was, I should say, the very beginning of my professional career was like doing the agate page, the box score page for the Sacramento Bee newspaper, and so that was always my favorite page. But there was a guy out of the Bay Area who still writes today, Ray Ratto, who I used to read a lot. He was just a funny column writer covering the Giants and 49ers and Warriors, my favorite teams growing up. And so I read a lot of him. And then I actually read a lot of Bill Plaschke. I would go online and read a lot of his stuff as well because I thought he was such a good column writer. And so I fell in love with sports columnists more than I did beat writing and those things. I always like the opinion, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still something so comforting to me, at least, to have like a physical newspaper in the sports section in your hand. I don't know. It's like a weird, I feel like a 90-year-old man with like a black coffee, and but it's like a weird feeling to me. But so I can imagine how that still nostalgia brings up for you as well. So you got this like one shot in college at that point where you're like, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
So yeah, I think that was the transition to for me for writing. I got really involved. I'm total college newspaper geek. I got so involved covering the men's basketball team there. I started covering the women's softball team, and then from there, really kind of moved over to basketball, and then got a column, and then I became editor in chief of the campus newspaper. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with every part of it. And then I got a part-time job at the Sacramento Bee newspaper around that time. And so I think that's when it really started to click. Like this is going to be my career, and I was finding success in it. And so for the and for anyone who would be listening to this around career planning and mapping, I would say this: it's like ultimately your gift that you're going to find and like why it is that you're in a certain career may not be what you think it is. The opportunities may not always match up with what your gift is at the time, but eventually they will start to reveal. And so for me, I still, I still consider myself a writer. But when I look and I think of like the creatives I work with now and some of the writers that I see across the board, who write novels or who write for television, I'm like, wow, they are way better than me at writing. And I think the gift that I always had was developing really strong relationships with the athletes I worked with, which allowed me to get insights and nuggets that were interesting to a reader. But I wasn't impressing anyone with my style and flow. And I think it wasn't until later in my writing career that I realized they're actually more interested in what I can go learn than how I can write it. And
Yeah.
so, and to this day, like with what we do at Uninterrupted, and I know we'll probably get more into that, but that's kind of like getting out of the way is my job now. It's getting the great nuggets and the insights and getting out of the way. And so the way that all kind of turned and developed is somewhat poetic.
Yeah, that's amazing. What was your approach at such a young age to getting those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, same thing that I do now is like a blessing and a curse that I am just going to be me, right? I never try and pretend to be anything that I haven't experienced or that I don't know. I think that it takes a lot of humility to develop authentic relationships. And the problem that I'll see a lot of times is like people trying to fit into an MBA culture,
Right.
and it's like, especially now, I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30, and I'm far closer to 40 now than I am to 30. And, you look at a lot of the athletes that I was covering at the time I worked with, I mean, like the average age is 25, mid 20s. And so for me, it's just always about being authentic. At the very beginning, I was lucky enough, timing's everything. I was lucky enough to cover the final run of the Sacramento Kings and when they were, a great team. And then I was lucky enough to move over to the Golden State Warriors right when they became a playoff team, and Steph Curry at the beginning of his career and Draymond Green, the start of his career. And so I was able to develop relationships that ended up being really fruitful, for what readers wanted. But I always go back to authenticity. I always try and be the same person that I am to that NBA player as I am to, my closest friends or the random person I meet at a coffee shop.
Yeah. Coming up in the sports reporting and the sports writing side is definitely a windy journey for most people. What can you kind of take back and reveal to our audience about something that people might not know about this entire journey?
Jeez. Well, one, it's funny. It's like, it's harder to become a profitable writer than it is to become an athlete.
Yeah.
It's just by the sheer numbers, right? There's,
Absolutely.
you think about, every NBA team having their full roster, and you multiply that out. And then you think about all the media spots that have, jobs that pay a good amount to be a sole job without having to have part-time work. it is really competitive. I also think that the line and I'm sure a lot of writers would disagree with this, for good or bad. I think that the truth though is that there's not a huge difference between a really well-paid writer and a writer who's not paid well at all. I think sometimes the talent level is the same,
Okay.
and it comes down to like why does this writer have the opportunity? Why do they have such a large platform and a voice? You could probably find better talent, you know, writing a blog and doing their own podcast than you'll see on television or writing for a major publication. And I think that's where it's tough when you look at kind of like the equity. It's not, you don't get these big roles just by merit alone. And I think that's really frustrating. And I think that a lot of people either give up at some point who are really talented, or they end up staying somewhere where it's a paycheck and they don't get those other opportunities. Or they do find the opportunity and it makes sense. But I would say that for people who are looking to get in this world, twists and turns, like I had what I call the Forrest Gump career, where I was doing all these different moments and things all the time, constantly weaving together, was because of that. I was trying to make enough money in certain spots. And so you have to jump around a little bit to keep making a little bit more. I do think that sports writing can be profitable. I think that the way businesses look at it, though, a lot of times is like the writer is the talent, and there's a ton of people who want that spot. And so they don't reward the writers from a compensation standpoint, maybe the way that you reward a salesperson or, someone in a different part of the industry. And so you have to be a business person too, and I think I'm starting to see that a little bit here and there of people who were writers at traditional outlets or, did radio or whatever, going out and finding like a digital lane to do their job because they can own everything and they can profit off what they make and create. And right now there's Substack and there's, one of my favorite writers is this guy, Ethan Sherwood Strauss, who he had been at Bleacher Report, he had been at ESPN, he'd been at The Athletic, and then he went out and started a Substack, started writing on his own. And I don't know his numbers, but my guess is he's pacing to do much better out on his own than with the traditional. So I think it's about being enterprising. Like he's someone who saw an opportunity, saw a window, and he's going out and grabbing it. Hope he doesn't mind me sharing that, but I could see it from afar anyway.
How does that affect the overall mainstream media in the sports industry then?
I mean, the mainstream media the spots are growing, the amount of, just because the nature of like, there's more platforms now than ever. There's people, Amazon's buying shows, obviously Hulu has live sports, right? There's more opportunity out there, but it does still feel like the same people are still getting those same opportunities. And I see that it is hard for people to break into it. And then you're dealing with obviously if a change happens at the top and they say, you know what, we're moving away from conversation. No one's going to do that, but let's say they did. We're moving away from conversation, or we're trying to bring in more former athletes, to have this role. You might see less spots, and the fluctuation is what gets hard because people get squeezed. Like I've been fired from a job before where I thought I was killing it, and it's a really hard pill to swallow. But I look back now and I'm like, oh, it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with business structure.
What was the job?
It was when I was at Bleacher Report. I was, and I love the people at Bleacher Report now, and I loved them then. But I came in, I was their NBA lead writer, and it was a positive experience. And they made shifts pretty quick into like what it was quite a lesson, by the way. I thought I had this like contract, like I was some sort of NFL starting quarterback or like Major League Baseball starting pitcher, and I come to find out it's not actually a 1-year contract. It's very much like, we're willing to pay you this, but we can end it at any point. I learned the hard way. Wow. And this was like a decade ago. Very different group, different people. And I think at the time, of course, you're bitter. You wonder, like, how did this happen? I gave up a lot to come here. And I think I learned not to personalize it over the years. And now I look back and it makes a lot of sense why it happened the way it happened. And that's why I have no hard feelings. And we're partners with them today. And some people I'm good friends with that work over there. and people that were in spots then, I still keep in touch with now. But yeah, those things, they sting, but I thank God that happened, because that's what led and paved the way for where I am now.
So were most of your contracts scheduled like that or put out like that? Like they could hire you, fire you at any point. It was a article by article basis. What did that look like?
I mean, it was really all of the above. My early jobs, I was staff, and I had, but it's the same thing. It's like you're at will, and they could tell you Monday we're done, and so most of us are that way to this day. I'm still that way, and so I was staff, and then I moved over. Using the example with Bleacher Report, that really at the end of the day was, even though there was this like agreement or what I deemed as a contract, it really was the same as being on staff. Like you're getting paid. There just wasn't benefits, so it was, not that different. And then there's the I think what I started to do later, I caught on with a tech startup in San Francisco, and I was like everybody in San Francisco. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a billionaire. I'm gonna figure this out. And so my day-to-day full-time is that, but I knew I loved sports and I wanted to stay in sports. And so I wrote on the side. And then that's like, you know, a fixed amount of dollars per article type situation. And I love that because it gave me flexibility to go out and do what I wanted to do. And it was side cash for me at that point, which is always a different conversation than when it's your main thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Does that take a certain level of pressure off of you as a writer when you have something that's really paying your bills on the 9 to 5 side?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're not, and it's funny though, it made me better because while the pressure, I still wanted to have the best. Like I was competitive about it. I always thought like when it was the NBA finals and everyone was sitting in the press conference room, I was out in the hallways trying to find an angle, something different, something unique that people couldn't watch on TV. And so I think when I was off on my own doing my thing, there was more latitude to kind of have that out there story versus trying to get like the main piece that the media outlet had to put, they felt like they had to have. And so it did give me a little bit more of that there. There's a guy, Audie Joseph, who was at the time he was with Sporting News, and now he's moved up to different great roles. He's a guy that kind of gave me my confidence back, to be honest. It was hard when I'd lost the position prior. You go through a little bit of this feeling of like, is this for me? Like, am I not down? You start questioning, even though now I know like not to personalize these things. At the time, I was very much personalizing it. And he gave me my confidence back. He's like, hey, go out, write what you want to write. He gave great feedback and constructive feedback, and would say, there was one day I wrote an article and I remember him telling me it was about Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and kind of their banter and their friendship. And he's like, you wrote the best story. He's like, I've read everything. You wrote the best story coming out of that game. And it felt like he meant it. And I think he meant it. And it was very inspiring. It was very encouraging for me, and it kind of gave me my legs back. And then from there, I had an opportunity to sit down and do kind of a one-on-one interview like we're doing with Steph Curry, right after they'd won his first championship, and asked him about whether or not he was going to come back to the Golden State Warriors. They had a pending free agency coming up. He told me, yes, I want to come back. I immediately wrote up the story. It broke news. It was on ESPN. And that whole cycle gave me my confidence. And I say it for two reasons. One is like, we all need that, right? We all need that encouragement, because it is hard. It's very competitive. It's a hard industry. It, I know it still. I try not to take things for granted today. And then the second part of that is to encourage other people. You don't know the effect you can have on somebody by offering them some encouragement, and that could be people who are in the industry, people who are readers, subscribers, fans, whatever. Be sure to share what you're thinking. Doesn't mean fake it, like be authentic, but if you feel some positive way about somebody, you should let them know.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of the shift of fully going back into the sports world. Was that right?
Yeah, it was. Everything's timing. You can read any Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, whatever, tell you that, right? It's so much timing. I was covering the Golden State Warriors I just done that interview, and a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, LeBron James and Maverick Carter are starting a media company." Um, and at the time, I was trying to be a billionaire, and I was looking at equity at this tech startup, and but I was going to turn down an opportunity to meet with Maverick Carter, and everything that he had been doing at that time. We're going all the way back to 2015 now too, was turning to gold, and I was like, I'm not gonna, not gonna miss this opportunity. But I went and I interviewed just like everybody else. Now it was at
How'd
a
you
much.
interview?
What's that?
How'd you get the interview?
So I got the interview. This goes back to relationships. One of the friends of mine who was a writer as well had heard about this opportunity coming, but it wasn't for him because he wanted to stay local, stay where he was. Or I shouldn't say local. He wanted to stay at his current role, which was a great one, still is. And he had told me about it. It was no different than if I was applying for AT&T or whatever. It was a cold call that I had as kind of like a pre-interview conversation. It went well, and I flew down to LA to meet. And I'll tell you, it was the nicest location for an interview I ever had. It was the backyard of Jimmy Iovine's house, and there were statues, and it was beautiful. And there was Dr. Dre albums, and it was like I knew that I was in a different world coming from my one-bedroom San Francisco place to this place. And I think everyone has like different levels of confidence at different times in their life. Thank God I had just had such positive momentum coming on the sports stuff and coming off the Warriors championship, covering that. And so I think I came in with a renewed sense of self about this world and knowing what they wanted to accomplish. And so it worked out. And I mean, I can truly say it changed my life. It changed my career life.
Right.
I should specify. So a little bit of the luck, relationships, but like the relationship came from me grinding and me still going out and covering games, even though I was somewhere else, keeping a foot in there. And so it is crazy though to think like how quickly career shifts can happen and how easily they could not happen at the same time. But it's kind of like that old sports adage of like, stay ready, and I was ready.
What was that? What do you think was the tipping point in your interview, or I'm assuming multiple interviews at Uninterrupted that got you the job?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I know. I think that
You've
one of
not
the things, yeah, I don't know if Maverick knows. I should ask. I should ask Maverick if he even knows like what it was. I think that I had, if I had to guess, one thing that I do remember is there was this part of me that wasn't ready to move to Los Angeles, and we had just found out that we were going to be expecting our first child like a week prior. And so this big shift of job and location and all this stuff, I wasn't nervous about getting the job or not getting the job because it wasn't even a thing yet. Like it was just a pilot program with, funny enough, Bleacher Report. And so I wasn't sure if I wanted it per se or what it was. And so I was very relaxed. And like anyone, like after a drink or two, you speak your mind a little bit more when you're relaxed. And so I think I spoke to the heart of like what we were gonna eventually we were gonna do it uninterrupted. I think where it could go right and where it could go wrong. And I was very honest with it. And so I think I probably came in with a strategy right out of the gate. And I think that people should look at that with interviews. Like I've interviewed so many people now, at this point in my career. And I think a lot of times the interviewees expect the interviewer to do most of the work and ask questions. I like to kind of sit back and say, you're the one who's going to tell me how you can make our place better. Absolutely. So you're kind of pitching me a little bit here. And that's where I like to, and that I think I pitched what it can be, what it should be. And then I got the chance to go do it.
How has Uninterrupted, in the time that you've been there and the time that your company has grown, really, how has that changed the landscape of the sports media world?
Yeah, I mean, we've been. I believe truly that we've been at the center of this ushering in this player empowerment movement, and I think player empowerment. Some people complain that it's hurt the NBA, for example. Like players have too much power. But then I would ask, what's the alternative? Did the owners have too much power, or that the media has too much power? Like, So why not have the players have more power? They should. And I don't think anyone's complaining, by the way, about the bottom line of the NBA right now. And so I would say that Uninterrupted, where we came in, it goes exactly to, I think, what I was saying earlier about getting out of the way. I think that we came in, and the shift that happened is it was always like you were either a public relations person and you were pushing an agenda, which still happens, puff pieces, things that aren't interesting, or you're a journalist and you're like out to figure it out and get it and tell your story the way you're going to tell it. And we kind of came in and we said, we don't actually have to do either of those things. Like, we can tell great stories from the perspective of the subject, working with them. And so what we did, and at the time, I remember I used to always say, it's like Uninterrupted is named Uninterrupted because LeBron James in his I'm Coming Home letter in Cleveland with Lee Jenkins, who's one of the best writers out there, and I hope he goes back to writing. He's with the Clippers right now, killing it. But if he could go back to writing, it would help my day to day. He had written that piece with LeBron, and in that piece, LeBron says, I want to speak uninterrupted. And that was the launch of letting athletes have their say and tell the story that they want. Now, inherently, you could come with credibility issues, right? Because if I want to tell you a story about anything in my interest, is it going to be 100% truthful? Like, that's always going to kind of be the rub that's existed, why you have journalists and why you have public relations teams, and you hope that it's going to fall somewhere in the middle. But what we did is we told athletes that problem. We told them this exists. If you want to tell your story with us, it has to be credible. It has to be the real story and the truth of it. And the same way, that's the name of your show. Like, the same, people want to be able to kind of like show themselves, and people want to show their authentic self. And sometimes I think they needed someone to help them. And Uninterrupted became an opportunity for athletes to show that they are more than an athlete, and showcase this other side. And so it was like, we have the creative, like we have the production capabilities, like we can find distribution partners if they're paid for. And we just started doing that. And we found more and more that athletes loved it and understood what we were trying to do and came to us. And then we found talent who wanted to make it happen, who wanted something different in their career. They didn't want to do one of those other two things. And so I think we did create a new lane.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels also like the core of Uninterrupted is that full circle moment back to your first article that you wrote in college.
Yeah. It is a little bit of, to me, it always comes back full circle, where it's like you find your voice. And I think athletes, when they find their voice through our storytelling, it does become a little aha moment for them as well, of like, oh, not only does my voice have power, but I can actually make change happen with my voice. And so a lot of what we've done, at times more than others, it's leaned into the social justice areas or passion areas. It's rarely will you ever see something on Uninterrupted where somebody has a hot take, or somebody is talking about, why the 4-3 defense is better than the nickel. Like, you're not going to find those conversations here. But what you will find is, like, hopefully humanistic conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, most people can recognize that timing is everything when it comes to most things in life, and specifically with your career. How do you think that people can work with timing, though, to help take it to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to, you can't sit around and wait for lightning to strike, right? And I think this idea of being in it and staying ready and all that, it's come up actually a lot for me lately. I look at people who are really driven, and people who are driven tend to make opportunity happen. And I think that, it's funny. I saw, I think it was like the Kim Kardashian getting torched for telling people to like go to work or something, and people not hitting, it wasn't working for where she was coming from as a very wealthy person, right? Who came from wealth.
Yeah.
And I think that the core, though, of the conversation that I'm thinking of, like, it's not necessarily like, do people want to work, or but is there this drive, this extra gear that someone's willing to take to say, I want to be this, and here's my game plan on how I'm going to do it. I think once you start doing that. Like, let's say I want to be a director and eventually I want to direct a feature doc or a feature film, scripted. I can just sit around and practice, or I can just start making stuff. And as I'm making stuff, I'm meeting people and I'm interviewing people, and maybe I'm showing some people my work. Now I'm very close to making an opportunity happen versus if I just sit. And I think a lot of times we sit in our sphere and we think that perhaps the work we're doing is being seen or people are going to acknowledge us. And I say this is the brutal, brutal truth of working in sports, is that nobody cares. And I mean that like in the kindest, meanest way possible, of that, like, and it's not because people are cold-hearted or anything like that. It's just because people aren't thinking about that. Everybody is so focused on ego and self, and this is true everywhere. It's not even a bad thing, it's just a human quality. They're not looking at like, oh, I want to help this person that I don't know over here who's doing this thing. Now, if that person comes to me and says, I can make this better for you, I can make this area, or I see something where I'm like, oh, this person over here can make it better, the opportunity is going to exist. But it's not going to exist if I don't see it. And so I think a lot of people need to figure out, to make opportunities happen, how do I get people to see what it is I bring?
How do you find that confidence in yourself to be able to verbalize that as well? I think that's something that people tend to be in a shell about. So where does your confidence come from now?
I mean, there's a number of things. I was just talking to the COO of our company this morning, actually, and I mentioned how important it is. I save, if someone sends me a nice note, like we talked about, I actually will screenshot it and I'll put it in a folder to save, because most of the time it's, you know, you're fielding, as I've grown in sports and to get now this great opportunity to be general manager, a lot of the time you're getting the fires to put out. You're not getting the fun stuff always, right? And so my confidence comes from past success. I think that's the thing that I can hold on to, is I've been in this situation before now. There's experience, there's past success. You know, I'm deeply rooted in faith. So at the same time, I don't really care if I fail. And there's a confidence in that. There's a freedom in that. You know, if from a career, if I got a call and they said, look, Jimmy, this is Maverick, it's not working out, I know tomorrow I'll be fine. You know I have everything that I had today, I have tomorrow, and one way or the other. And so I think that's kind of comes with experience. My confidence is in the fact that, you know, at the end of the day, we're all going to retire and we're all going to be looking for something to do. and I think we put a lot into our careers, as we should, and I definitely do, but I do it because I love what I do. You know, I don't do it because, you know, I think it's going to create enough wealth for me to have the next car, the next thing. And so my confidence again comes into past success. And also, like, I'll say this is like a final cap on that, is relationships are everything. Having really strong relationships, because you're being authentic. I've always told my team, there's only 3 qualities I care about. Like, are you being direct with people, so they always know what your intention is, work-wise, right? Are you being honest with people? You're not, not exaggerating things, being really, sometimes honesty can be hard and other times it can be great. But are you being honest? And then are you being kind? Because I think if you're doing all 3 of those things, that's like wisdom, and you're acting wise and you're making strong relationships because of that. And when you have really strong relationships, you'll have confidence, because you'll have the support of people, knowing that people support you. That's what I think breeds confidence.
Those are wise words. I think those are the wisest words to end on. So, Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on the Come Up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the gray hair is where the wisdom's coming from, I'm hoping.
Distinguished. I love it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.